Good evening. China remains the main threat to the United States globally, but of increasing concern is its closer cooperation with Russia, Iran and North Korea, said an annual US intelligence report released Tuesday. China's rise in all areas of power has been identified for years by the US as its main threat and was behind Barack Obama's strategic Asia-Pacific pivot. That is the American perspective, but China sees its rise rooted in its commitment to peaceful development, international cooperation and mutual benefit. Yet it faces accusations that exaggerate its intentions and disregard its respect for sovereignty and stability of other countries, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. Welcome to Press TV Spotlight. I am Bahman Roy, your host. Let us begin with a short report.
China and the United States, two world powers locked in escalating tensions. The rivalry between Beijing and Washington continues to rise, from economic sanctions and import tariffs to military maneuvers and technological competition. The stakes are higher than ever. The economic standoff, which began in 2018 under President Donald Trump, was marked by waves of import tariffs and retaliatory measures. Back then, Trump accused China of unfair trade practices and intellectual property theft. Beijing responded with rising tariffs on U.S. goods. The tit-for-tat move escalated following Trump's second-term inauguration, with the U.S. imposing additional tariffs on Chinese goods just days into his new term. China retaliated with levies on a number of U.S. products, including coal and agricultural ones. By March, the conflict intensified further, targeting a broader range of imports. Beyond tariffs, the U.S. has ramped up its pressure campaign to contain China's power rise through sanctions. In the latest attempt, Washington blacklisted dozens of Chinese entities, including technology firms, aiming to restrict Beijing's development of high-performance computing capabilities. The U.S. government justified the move by citing national security and foreign policy concerns. China, however, accused Washington of weaponizing trade and technology in a typical act of hegemonism.
We urge the U.S. to stop generalizing the concept of national security and stop abusing all kinds of sanction lists to unreasonably suppress Chinese enterprises.
Tensions, however, have been extending far beyond trade. A recent U.S. intelligence report has identified China as, quote, the most comprehensive and robust military and cyber threat to American national security. The report, which compiles assessments from U.S. intelligence agencies, warns of Beijing's ability to hit the U.S. with conventional weapons, compromise U.S. infrastructure through cyber attacks, target assets in space, and challenge America's dominance in artificial intelligence. Beijing has reacted to the report, calling it biased, and accused Washington of exaggerating the China threats.
We advise the U.S. not to use its own hegemonic logic to mirror China, not to view China-U.S. relations with outdated Cold War thinking, not to contain and suppress China in the name of strategic competition, and not to exaggerate the China threat.
Beijing has also urged Washington to scale back its military presence in the South China Sea and halt its support for Taiwan, which China considers part of its sovereign territory. The report also shows that Washington has grown increasingly uneasy about China's deepening ties with its allies, including key U.S. adversaries such as Russia and Iran. As the two powers maneuver for influence across the globe, the tension between them is no longer a bilateral affair. It has become a global chess match with implications for every corner of the world. How will these tensions shape the future of international relations? Only time will tell.
Welcome back. Allow me to introduce my guests. Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, joining us from Bradenton, US. And Daniel Patrick Welch, geopolitical analyst and political commentator, joining us from Boston, also from the US. Gentlemen, very good to have you on the program. I'm going to start my very first question with you, Larry. How does China's growing military and economic power challenge the United States' global power?
Well, it's a threat that the United States has created. Look, if I walk up to you and I start poking you in the chest, and then I put hands on your wife, and you punch me back, and then the person punched says, I've been attacked unjustly. Well, that's not true. And that's exactly what's been going on here. You know, we can write, I was going to propose writing the book, Chinese Overseas Military Adventures. The problem was it'd only be about a chapter long, because the only time that China has actually done any kind of military activity outside of its territorial boundaries was back in 1979 when it fought Vietnam on behalf because of Vietnam's war with Cambodia. So the fact of the matter is, it's not China that's been the military expansionist. It's not China that has 700 plus military bases around the world. It's not China that basically started a war with Libya and then invaded Iraq and invaded Afghanistan and started a war with Syria. That's not China, that's the United States. So what we're engaged here with is the United States is doing a form of what the psychologists call projection. They're assigning to China the blame for what we're doing. And China's listened. You know, there was just about a year ago that a U.S. admiral, the deputy commander, I believe, in Indo-PACOM, the segment of the U.S. military responsible for the Asia-Pacific region, said openly that, hey, we're going to be at war with China by the end of 2025. Well, if you're Chinese leaders, particularly intelligence officials and military leaders, you have to take that as a serious threat and prepare accordingly. And so when China prepares in response to the bellicose rhetoric of the United States, China is then blamed, oh, China is trying to take over the world. It's just a lie.
Right. I'm going to ask the same question to Daniel. Daniel, how do you think this, the Chinese, if I can call it hegemony, or if the Chinese influence over the world, how is it going to affect the American power and influence? How can they not work together for a shared objective, for example?
Well, I love what Larry said. I can't really enhance it or add to it too much. But it is important to look at what the U.S. has done in that the psychological example that he uses, that they're accusing, like every sociopath, accusing its greatest victim of its own crimes. And to say, I think what you asked was, don't these work together, right? First of all, to bring economies up, to bring people up, to focus on development. Yes, that is a universal objective that you can say is a common purpose of all nations, corporations, human beings on Earth. But if your point is to be at the top of the pile, that's like if your only objective is playing king of the hill, then you're only looking at who to kick down, who's climbing up too fast. So what China is doing wrong is actually playing at the same game, which is not to take over, but to develop. And this is a thing that China has set, is one of the interesting things. You're dealing with the Trump administration, which is a flash in the pan, really, except for its embrace of long-term strategy of keeping the U.S. in the driver's seat and in the position of control over all the other countries in the world. But this thing of being, long-term planning, right? This is since the Sino-Soviet split. This is Nixon, and the reestablishment of relations with the West is a blink of an eye ago for China. I wish the U.S. could think in the same way. That's what they're saying. Don't think in these these Cold War hegemonic logic, but think in longer terms. This is how the world works. And we are doing something that they pledged to do 50, 70 years ago, is to beat them at their own game, not because they want to win the game, but because if you stay out of foreign affairs, like they have remarkably done, compared to the Soviet Union and obviously specifically compared to the US, and used every other variable to climb up and take over the position, say in AI and chip development, and even in military development, then you really are a threat. If you change the rhetoric a little bit, you really are a threat because you're doing it right. And this is, of course, whether they say it or not, this is the problem. The problem with China is it's too good. You can't say that because you sound like a toddler or something. But that is why. That is what Ukraine is about. That is what Libya is about. That is what putting typhoons in Philippines is about. Trying to muscle in on AUKUS or the Strait of Taiwan. All of that is to counter a real competitor, and to do it unfairly and to cheat at it if you can, because that's how you've got where you are if you're the U.S., and it works. And if you can cheat them and beat them, then that's a good strategy.
Well, I'm going to get back onto the technological side that you just mentioned, and also the issue of Taiwan. But I'm going to talk to Larry right now. You are a former CIA analyst. Tell me, what are the implications of China's alignment with the likes of Russia, Iran, and North Korea for the model of international stability that is proposed by the U.S., the American model?
Well, it depends on which assumptions you make and where you sit. The United States, well, the Trump administration right now, at the senior levels, as well as most pundits that deal with Asia, as well as the think tanks that populate the United States, all believe that there's no way that Russia and China can have any kind of real, lasting, long-term relationship. I mean, good God, they're those stinky Chinese. They're, yellow and but because the Russians are like us, racially pure. I mean, that's the subterfuge to this. And they really believe that they can split Russia off China. And it's so cynical because this is like we're telling them to break up with their partner so that we can rape them. We're going to rape Russia first, and then we'll deal with China. I was 3 weeks ago. I had a chance to interview Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, just myself and two other individuals, and I specifically asked him about this, and he answered in a way that Daniel will appreciate, because he repeated the point that Daniel was making. He goes, we've got a history with China, and it hasn't always necessarily been good, but we have a relationship now that's founded on mutual respect. It's economic, it's political, it's military, but he says the Chinese have a much longer time horizon, and he put his hand up like this. They've got a much longer view of things than we do. But he says this is a genuine relationship, and we recognize that we cannot put ourselves in a position where we're going to be beholden or vulnerable to Western economic control. So very clear on that point that Russia and China have entered into a relationship, and this isn't recent, because notice that starting in 2019, Russia and China began conducting annual joint naval military exercises with Iran. And those exercises started in 2019. And the fact that that was when it was first executed in March of 2019, that means the planning for it started no later than 2018 and most likely started in 2017. So basically, we're saying for the last 8 years, Russia, China, and Iran have been talking about the need for an economic realignment that also entails military support. And one of the reasons for that is what Russia's proposing is a north-south highway or railway that's going to extend from the port cities in southern Iran and will run up through Azerbaijan into Russia. This way, they circumvent all the madness in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, and Russia is no longer dependent upon the kind of influence that the West exercises there. So no, that's one of the big things that's at play here.
Right, thank you, Larry. I'm going to ask Daniel about the Taiwan issue between the two countries. Well, the US presidents, the US governments tend to always complain about China's coercive pressure on Taiwan. But at the same time, the Chinese government always says that this is intervention in our internal affairs. So how is this issue going to overshadow the future of the relations between the two countries?
Well, I mean, overshadowing is with all due respect, I think is the wrong word to use, because it's essential. That's the only actual defense mechanism. Remember my thing about the toddlers, right? If that's the only argument you have, you start with it. It's like saying the Republic of Texas, is being bullied by the U.S. Or, I mean, you can't even make up an anecdote as ridiculous as this. You see slippage in the commitment to the one China policy that helped bring China into the UN, into the global atmosphere in general. And there's some language changes on the website. I didn't pay attention to the actual details, but something is slipping in terms of towing the line that they've always said since then, which is that there is one China, and Taiwan is part of China. Now, if you try to interject as using that to split China, then you obviously have given up on the overall idea, which makes your position completely untenable. You cannot have a relationship with China in the current, meaning the last 70 years, without accepting that as the premise. And once you poke under that skin, it is completely, it's like interpersonal relations. It's completely obnoxious. We're not talking about that. Hey, stop that. We're not talking. I told you, that's off the table. That's always been off the table. Don't keep telling us that. And what, again, as Larry pointed out well, too, is that the arguments coming against it are actually the arguments that you would put for it. They say China is making Taiwan an issue or a problem. They're being coercive. They're being subversive. I love when they use that language. Like nothing could fit the U.S. perspective better than that, but it's always the other person who's being coercive and subversive. And they're trying to use Taiwan when all they're doing is exactly what they said from the beginning. Taiwan is China, and you cannot fund the opposition. Some have small group military joint exercises that are, only inches from mainland China. I mean, it's insane that the U.S. tries to flip it like that. But they are going to continue to use Taiwan, and they will fail because they are failing in the general sense, like we have been covering so far. They're losing the big game, and these are tiny pieces on the chessboard, and they're going to lose those too.
Right, Larry, America, on the other hand, is reinforcing its presence in the South China Sea area. What justifies that?
They've recognized they're losing their shirt in Ukraine. We just had a press report here in the last 4 hours out of the New York Post about 4 American soldiers that died in Lithuania or Latvia, supposedly. I guarantee they were killed in Ukraine, and they're using the cover to Latvia or Lithuania to cover that. So the overall sentiment is, we can't defeat Russia, so therefore we better move on to get prepared to defeat China, which is it's insane. It's a crazy position, but I guess it's perceived that has the best, let's call it, economic prospects for the military-industrial complex, which has been profiting from the war in Ukraine and now is looking to profit from a build-up to a non-existent, I'll call it a non-existent military threat from China, because China is not planning to attack anybody. China is taking defensive measures that are provoked by us, and in return, we get to pretend that they're going to attack us, which then allows us to say, hey, man, that defense budget, 1 trillion is not enough. Let's kick it up to 1.2 trillion. We're gonna keep Western money overseas and impoverishing the American people.
Right, Daniel, China always claims right now that the US is weaponizing trade and financial affairs to inflict hits on this country, and they're just reacting to what they are seeing from the American side. Your take on that?
I think that's exactly right. You know, that is, I love listening to both the Chinese and the Russian perspectives, because it's a breath of fresh air in some sense. Not that I have to agree with it, but it is just the bare bones truth. All they're doing is doing what they're doing. And the Americans are then using it, weaponizing it, exactly as they said. And Guo Jiakun, the spokesperson for the foreign ministry, who said that this is illegal. This is using, you can't use sanctions and our foreign policy as a means to justify what you're calling economic decisions, because they're not. And that is what the U.S. has used going back, well, at least to Kissinger. One of the things about realpolitik is that Kissinger was using both truth, and he wasn't dealing with a Bush League, no pun intended, of used car salesmen who knew how to make this deal by dealing with reality and not just browbeating people. You can't win the argument or the deal that way. It's not a used car. Shuttle diplomacy is not about selling real estate.
Right, gentlemen, thank you so much. I wanted this conversation to go on for an hour, but unfortunately, for the sake of time, we have to end this. Thank you so much for your presence once again. Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, joining us from Bradenton, US, and Daniel Patrick Welch, geopolitical analyst and political commentator, joining us from Boston, also from the US. And thank you so much, our dear viewers, for staying with us on another Spotlight. We'll see you back tomorrow.